Algebra 1, Lesson 12, Solving Equations with Absolute Value. Now let's start solving equations that involve an interesting operation called the absolute value. We like to define the absolute value of a number like this. The absolute value of a number defines its distance from 0 on the number line. The absolute value of a number is never negative. Those are basically the main rules you need to know when solving equations with absolute value. For example, the absolute value of the number -6 can be expressed as follows, with the number -6 between two vertical bars. The absolute value of -6, and then we would evaluate that expression to equal the number 6 like this. The absolute value of -6 equals 6. We can use our knowledge of solving multi-step equations and apply it to solving equations with absolute values. Example 1. The absolute value of x minus 3 equals 15. For this equation, we need to identify the expression between the absolute value bars and realize that the equation is asking us to find two solutions. X minus 3 equals 15, and x minus 3 equals minus 15. These two equations could be solved by one step each, so we end up with our two solutions. X equals 18 and x equals minus 12. Example 2. 5 times the absolute value of x equals 35. With this example, we simply isolate the absolute value containing the unknown variable by dividing both sides of the equation by 5. We end up with the absolute value of x equals 7, which means that x could be 7 or minus 7. One thing to note is that because of the nature of absolute value equations, sometimes you will have no solution. One basic example is the absolute value of x equals minus 3. Based on the definition of an absolute value, it is impossible for it to be evaluated to be a negative number, so in those cases we will simply write no solution. Now that you know the basics, let's do a challenge problem. Solve the following equation. 2 times the absolute value of x plus 6 plus 5 equals 3. Before we solve, let's ask ourselves these 3 questions. Does this equation have 2 solutions? Does this equation have 1 solution? Does this equation have no solution? Let's dive right in and find out. We will first start by trying to isolate the expression that is contained within the absolute value. We need to do 2 steps to make it happen. We subtract 5 from both sides. We divide both sides by 2. After doing those steps, we end up with the absolute value of x plus 6 equals minus 1. Our first instinct would be trying to break up the absolute value and try to solve 2 equations. But if you take a closer look, you will realize that the equation is asking for the absolute value to equal a negative number, which, as we should already know, is impossible. So our final answer is no solution. Solving absolute value equations will vary in difficulty and the amount of work you need to do to solve them. But if you have already practiced solving regular algebraic equations, absolute value is just another tool in your arsenal to help solve more difficult equations. See you in the next lesson. Next.